Darkness kills, destroys the will. Find a spark, make hearts thrill. Hear the tales of time so grim. Shine a light, don't let it dim. Heather Brown downtown, bound. True crime story she's found. In the shadows, secret state. Need a light that finds the way.
Welcome back to another episode of Defeating the Darkness, True Crime Stories with Downtown Heather Brown. That's me, your host, Heather Brown, and I am a former sexual assault and homicide prosecutor in Orange County, California. I'm now retired and I host this podcast and I try to bring light to the darkest places. And also to illustrate, I like to bring on people that illustrate to me someone who's spreading a message of hope and shining light where there once was darkness. And one of those people that we have, it's the second episode of a, what do we call it? Podcast with Jesse Vasquez, who was an inmate at San Quentin State Prison for almost 20 years. You were convicted of an attempt murder with premeditation and deliberation. You were given a life sentence. And at some point in 2018, you came up for parole, correct?
Yeah.
Welcome back. Welcome back to finish the story. If you haven't listened to the first part of this particular segment, you need to go back and listen to part one with Jesse Vasquez, because it's fascinating, all the things that he talks about and his experience while being locked down in some of California's most maximum security prisons. And so thank you for following up, and let's finish off this fascinating story. So you and I met in 2017 when I was on a tour.
Yeah, media center.
In the media center, and you were working in the media center. So in the last episode, we were talking about just the kind of the problem with prisons and the prison system. And on the you and I have had this conversation before, but for our listeners who didn't hear this part of the conversation, just share a little bit about kind of your thoughts about what happens to people when they get locked down for life in prison.
Yeah, so up until shortly, I would say, and I say shortly, like kind of flippantly, it's 10 years. So in 2014, right, was the first time ever that we actually started seeing lifers actually getting granted parole. So prior to that, anybody who went in with a life sentence, whether it was a 7 to life sentence under the Habitual Criminal Act, they're still in there. Like there's a guy that's been in 53 years on a 7 to life. There might be other factors that are contributing to that, but it's a 7 to life sentence that he got back in 1979. And then there's another guy, that I know who has 7 to life, from 1971, and he's still inside of the system. So these individuals, for the most part, grew up in a system without hope, without opportunity, without resources. I mean, the purpose of prisons has always been punishment up until January 1st of this year. So we're talking about a system that had no redemptive value for them other than warehousing them. So for them and for me going in, with a life sentence, it just meant like, okay, well, this is my life, for till the day I die or until something changes. And even that is just like, sometimes you become hopeless with like the way the system changes. So there's laws that get passed, and then discretion on implementation is given to like the wolf over the hen house. And then it's like, oh man, I thought we actually had a chance, and now it's like there's all these hurdles that you have to jump through. So it's kind of hard, right? Like finding hope and purpose when you don't have any type of like legal standing and definitely no moral standing to ask for relief, because a lot of us deep down inside, we know like, okay, we messed up. And then there's like those that like, okay, I messed up, but I'm gonna try and find a loophole. And then there's those of us that it's like, no, I messed up and let me make amends. Let me try and find a way to redeem myself in spite of the situation. So there's like categories of lifers. There's those that just give up. There's those that try. And then there's those that are trying to just get a foothold and try and get out. So I interacted with all of them, and I learned from every single one of them, that the two best things that you can do in prison, in spite of like the government's, like support or not, like you have to find your own hope and your own purpose, to make ends meet.
I love that. And you did just that. And so for our listeners who don't know this, I was actually sent by my office, the Orange County DA's office, to oppose the release of Mr. Vasquez. And, obviously they don't give it to you and say, go oppose the release. But the understanding is that's our role in the system, is to advocate for victims of crime and keep hardened criminals and violent offenders in prison as long as possible. And then, but with that, we do look into the factors, of the life crime. As the prosecutor on the case, I, read our file, and then we're given a psychological report from a psychologist who interviews the inmate and whatnot. And then you go into this room in the prison, and I would in this particular case, I flew up to San Quentin. And okay, so back up. We met though the year before I went to your parole hearing.
Yeah.
And I don't even know until this moment that did I put that together then?
Yeah, you put it together because I have it in my transcripts from the parole board hearing.
Okay.
So it was interesting because I walked in, and it was just like a normal parole board hearing for everybody else. It was my first parole board hearing. My attorney, Lori Kelly, she was just like, yeah, just stay calm. You've already done the work. Just answer the questions, as authentically as possible. And everybody just goes to the parole board hearing, under the assumption that you'll get denied just because a prosecutor is going to oppose you. So it was interesting when they went around and it was like the prosecutor's turn, to like oppose and stuff. And in the transcripts, I remember it was like, I'm not telling the parole board, what you should or shouldn't do, but this is what the law says, like you have to give extreme weight to his age. You have to understand that he was a juvenile. You have to understand the mitigating factors, and you made a statement about, I know I've met him in the media center, and I was wondering, why do we still have individuals like him in here? Like he's a different person than who he was when he committed his case. And then you said something to the effect of, I'm not telling the parole board what you should or shouldn't do, but I ethically, could not find a reason to oppose him, so I'm just going to leave it in the hands of the parole board. And 5 minutes later, they found me suitable.
They found you suitable for parole. Yeah. So, wow, that's wild. So, yeah, I do remember going to the hearing, because I went to a lot of those hearings, and I had never said, basically let him out because, you really, as a prosecutor, that kind of is your role, is to say this is why you shouldn't let him out. And when we sat there in that hearing, I remember thinking I honestly, and I just kind of dug a little deep and thought, Heather, do you really have one good reason why this man should not be released? Other than the fact he committed a crime 20-something years ago when he was 17 years old. And I really felt in that moment, Jesse, that I had met you and I wasn't the prosecutor opposing or, even attending your parole hearing. And so we had a lovely conversation in the media center when I went on a tour. And I do remember that day that I met you in that. I remember the media center. I remember everything, but I guess I just blocked out that factor about it. But I just have to read this to everybody. So, because this actually brought me to tears. The reason that you're here and that we're, now friends. I left that day not knowing. I didn't know what they would do with the position that I took in that hearing. I was basically like, listen, I don't have any reason to oppose the release of him. I'm not telling you what to do one way or the other, right? That was my way of covering my ass. So if you got out and did something shady, it wouldn't be on me, it'd be on them. But I didn't have any reason to oppose your release, and I said it. I do remember saying ethically, I don't really have any basis to point to, a reason why you should not let him out. And so on May the 5th, 2022, on my LinkedIn instant messaging, I got this message. Miss Brown, it's okay if I read this?
Yeah, of course.
It was Jesse Vasquez. I was like, oh, I don't know who this is, but I read the message. It said, Miss Brown, I hope this message finds you well. It has been almost 3 years since I was released from San Quentin State Prison, and not one day has been wasted, taken for granted, or squandered. From the second day I was out, I was volunteering at Madison Park Academy in deep East Oakland, trying to make a difference in juvenile lives. For the next year and a half, I worked feeding the homeless, needy, and seniors while going to college and working with the Department of Corrections to provide better reentry support and resources to people returning to our communities. I got certified as a peer support specialist, received a brown card to return back to prisoners as a volunteer to help change the prison gang culture, and have been fortunate to have piloted the first Women's Writing Journalism Guild at Folsom Women's Facility. I wanted to wait a few years to share with you how much it meant for me to have you see me beyond the case factors that I was, quote, on paper. It made all the difference. There isn't one day that I'm not grateful for the opportunity to make a difference and have an impact. Last week, I received another recognition award for my community work and commitment to promoting accountability, responsibility, and personal growth in the prison and on the streets. I've been invited on numerous occasions to talk about my work with San Quentin News and why it matters. And I think I've always concluded that our stories, authentically told, can build empathy and understanding if we just tell the truth and own up to our mistakes. I could share more, but I won't take up more of your time. I just wanted to say thank you because tomorrow I get to drive to Orange County to see my mother for Mother's Day weekend because you chose to believe that I was different. Every time I read that, it brings tears to my eyes. It brought tears to my eyes that day that I read it. And I thought, oh, wow, like I had no idea. I didn't know that you had been released. I didn't follow up after that. We're so busy. And I didn't know that you were out, making a difference in the world and trying to change things. And I'm so happy. I'm so relieved you didn't go do something terrible on my watch. No, I'm really happy. Yeah. That brings me hope. And I just think it goes to show I have the gift of discernment. I'm not going to lie, because I did feel, I do remember that hearing, and I do remember thinking, I think this guy's going to do really great things. And I thought that because you were doing great things while you were incarcerated. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing while you were locked down, and then what you did when you got out.
Yeah. So I think, it's interesting that you said, like, I never followed up. I never wondered, like, what happened after the hearing, right? I think that's the sentiment that most prosecutors have. Mm-hmm. That's the sentiment that every defense attorney probably has. That's the sentiment that probably every judge shares, right? Part of the work that I did at San Quentin News, I came into something that was great. It was a good program already. They had a newspaper, they had a podcast, they had a different type of like elements to media. And we had like these prosecutor forums. And we used to have law enforcement forums and like community awareness forums where we'd invite local district attorneys and things like that. Those were probably by far like my favorite activities, just to engage with individuals who like would have never cared 2 bits what happens after, the trial, what happens after you go to prison, right? And I think like that's the story that we wanted to tell. So part of my like work and passion in the media center was highlighting those stories and bringing in the people that otherwise would not have that exposure. And we saw something great happen, not because of policy changes that were taking place, but because relationships were being built. Like we had George Gascon, right, who went from being, San Francisco prosecutor. Well, I know. I mean, I know how Orange County feels about Bay Area prosecutors, and it's not just that, right? I think him.
Well, then he came to LA and basically dismantled the criminal justice system. Sorry, Jesse, we're gonna have to agree to disagree.
So this is the thing, right? Like people can have good intentions, and the timing may not be right. And then when the timing is right, and you don't have the right people, it can all go to shit too. So both things can be true at the same time, right? And it's just like, who do you take into what environment, and how fast does change need to happen? We had the same problem like, last year with Pam Price taking over Alameda County, and we saw what happened there, right? It's like you can have good intentions on like, we want to provide more restorative opportunities for our communities, but doing so safely, ethically, right, and responsibly like takes time. You can't just make those flippant decisions on your own, right? Then you got to deal with a recall and now you're gone, right? So I think like that's the thing, right? So George Gascon as a person, right, is different than George Gascon as a prosecutor. Sometimes you got to remember head prosecutors are politicians first and foremost. You know, they don't have the flexibility or privilege of being regular people. They're going to get judged based on their politics. So when they would come in, right, whether it was him, Jeff Rosen, Wagstaff from San Mateo County, right, we had DAs from all over the Bay Area come in, even from Sacramento. They would drive over there, hold these forums with us. And Wagstaff was the one who told us, like, yeah, I'm probably never going to change my views. I'm just too old. I'm just too old. I'm still like tough on crime, right? But at least he was authentic. He was authentic in his articulation. Like, yeah, this is great that you guys are doing this, but you guys are 16 people out of 120,000 incarcerated. We don't know that everybody's going to change like you. And taking that chance is not in our job description. Right. So I understand that from the prosecutor's perspective, but having those dialogue and creating those conversations and just opening the door for a bit of compassion and empathy, that changes things.
It does. It does.
Because none of them go back to their work environment, right, and are the same afterwards. Like we started having more and more of their office staff, right, come in. Like the head DA would bring them in. Like Jeff Rosen and George Gascon like teamed up to like organize a 50 state prosecutor forum at San Quentin, where they brought prosecutors in from every single state. Like that's how big it got, right?
Wow.
And like just having those discussions and letting people have exposure to like, this is what happens, right? And it's not just like, this is what happens in a vacuum. This is what happens with intentionality. This is what happens when the department allows programs. This is what happens when the department promotes education. This is what happens when the Department of Corrections promotes humanity amongst the staff and the incarcerated. Like this is what happens when you have the perfect storm. But not every prison is San Quentin, you know, but we would start at San Quentin. And I think now, like, this is where my work translates to. Like, what I was doing inside is the same thing that I'm doing now. Same way that I was able to sit there and have these uncomfortable conversations with individuals who, like, were diametrically opposed. You're a prosecutor, you're a cop, you're a police chief, right? You want to lock people up like me. You want to keep us off the streets and stuff like that. But yet, the only thing you have against me is who I was 20 years ago. Like, can you understand that? Like, can you actually see beyond that? Like, you have nothing against me that's recent. You have nothing to hold against me. You're not even morally superior to me anymore. You know, I've done matured, you know, that man has already died and become new. And you're still holding stuff against me, you know, from 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that conversation is what sparked a lot of change. So about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, you know, we started this, well, I didn't start it, right? But Governor Gavin Newsom, you know, decided to transform San Quentin into a rehabilitation center. Mm-hmm. Let's think about incarceration differently. Let's, you know, promote some criminal justice reform. Like, for better or worse, his policies, right? You know, like, I don't necessarily agree with all of his policies, but there are certain things, right, that I will never be opposed to. One of them is human kindness, and the second one is second chances. I'll never be opposed to anybody who promotes those two things. You know, so when he said, hey, would you like to be on this committee or this council to reimagine San Quentin into a rehabilitation center? A one-of-its-kind, right, one-stop shop where people are going to have a roadmap to reentry, get the education that they need, get the vocational training that they need, get the programming that they need to deal with their criminogenic needs. And criminogenic needs is just like a fluff word, right, for like the causative factors that led you to like your incarceration, whether that's your anger, your addictions, your toxic relationships, whatever it may be. Right? Like, he wanted to make sure that we created a wraparound service and an environment where people were able to flourish as individuals. So I signed up for that and I said, yeah, I can get behind that. I can definitely get behind this whole California model, which is the new emphasis on like dynamic security, normalization, trauma-informed treatment, and also providing, you know, like some independence and a lot of support. I think that's the only way that we can actually say like, hey, we did everything in our power to help you be a better human being, and you still chose to do wrong, but we've invested in you. Now we can actually say that. Before we couldn't.
But Jesse, how do you measure that as like a society if, like, for example, in our parole hearing, mm-hmm. I didn't see the 16-year-old you, mm-hmm. the 17-year-old you. Mm-hmm. I saw the 40-year-old you. Mm-hmm. And I thought, this guy's going to do great things. I found you to be articulate. I thought you had insight to the life crime. I thought you were genuinely remorseful for what you had done. And I thought you had done everything you could while incarcerated to be good, to do good, and to learn and to find a path where you could be a productive member of society. But like you said, that's like, I think you could be the, one of the exceptions to the rule. And I've met some other great inmates who are locked down for life who have gotten out, and they're wonderful and they're doing great things too. And so there are those people, but if my kid's murdered, my daughter's raped and murdered, God forbid, or, that's obviously a hypothetical, but if that were to happen and then some guy gets life in prison and then he does a restorative justice class, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
I want him to stay in prison forever for what he's done and never do it to another child. So no one else has to feel the pain and trauma I've felt. So somebody's got to make the decision. Is that person, did that class, is he really changed, or is he just feeding you the bullshit that you need to say to pretend like you're not going to go do something horrible again?
Well, I think we obviously start from two different value propositions, right? Like our criminal justice system has always been vindictive and retributive. It's never been restorative, right?
Right. Agree.
So for instance, right?
Well, there has been rehabilitation aspects. There's probation. And a lot of times the people end up on life crimes have had opportunities for probation or parole and they failed and then they go. Yeah,
but that's like, like if we're talking about probation and parole in like the traditional sense, it's like community or county supervision with no support systems.
I agree with you.
That's all we got. That's all we got, right? So the best thing that we could do, right, is like, okay, we're going to throw you in jail. We're going to give you probation or parole, and we're going to give you no resources, no support systems, no programming, right? No check-in, right? The only time we're going to come get you is if you're like, you miss an appointment with us.
You violate.
You're not meeting our expectations. That's not support. We've never actually made a comprehensive attempt at actually providing services to prop people up for success. And even when we have, we've never changed the barriers to that success. There are still a lot of like, we have this ban the box. Yeah, you can ban the box, right? That means they can't ask you up front if you're a felon. On the back end, after the offer is given to you, they run a background check and they can still take the offer back. So you don't have, like the prerequisites to guarantee my success. You have the prerequisites to guarantee my failure, though. So that's the thing, right? So I'm getting at, right, it's like if we're going to start from a value proposition of, okay, this hypothetical lady gets her daughter killed and stuff like that, right? Doesn't want to see the murder come back, right? What is the value in the incarceration? What is the value of 2 lives being lost because of one act? Not saying that the person shouldn't do time. I'm not saying that they shouldn't do 10, 15, 20 years and earn, the right or the privilege to come back to their society. But would it not be more redemptive and more valuable if that life hadn't been lost in vain? That there's some restoration and some redemption, and that this person starts making amends and starts actually making worthwhile to where it's like, yeah, that person did not die in vain. Like there's more value in that than just saying like, oh, I'm keeping him in prison, just out of spite. Just out of spite. Because that's the whole thing, right? It's like, this is why I think like the court systems are a necessary evil, right? I can never say that it's a necessary good. I'm gonna say that it's a necessary evil in our society, right? Us as human beings, right, are always gonna be vindictive in our desire for justice. And it is never justice. We don't ever ask for like, the rightful balance. We want eye for an eye. That's human nature. That's just the way we respond. So my value proposition when it comes to like the murder, I have a hard time advocating for sex offenders, right? I have a different element of detest, for those type of crimes.
That's what I'm talking. Right? Yeah, no, I do too. I'm like, let's light them on fire, and I try to purge that like mean-spirited part of me, but it hasn't gone yet.
We have to find some balance, right? So I can't ask for like mercy for one and not for the other, right? I can't have compassion for one and not the other. But me as somebody who's formerly incarcerated and having seen, like, okay, there's some redemption that can happen for everybody on every level at some point. Sentencing them to like death doesn't do anything in California. Now, if we were in Texas and you get the death penalty, now you're talking, right? Now we're cooking with fire.
Right.
California does not do death sentences anymore.
I know, but don't you think the victims of like the crimes that are warranting or, that warrant the death penalty, that at least the idea that 12 people think you deserve to die for what you did, don't you think that somehow in some way is comforting to the family?
I mean, in the immediate sense, yes, it is comforting knowing that, yeah, like one day they're going to pay, for like the crime that they did.
See, to me, I never even cared if they did put them to death, right? And I've worked on death penalty cases, but to me, it was just, I just wanted, I was hopeful it would be a deterrent effect, right? Don't you think?
For who, though?
For the criminals.
I mean, if they go to jail as a deterrent, they're not going to commit any more crime. Here's the other issue, right? Like, I didn't want to touch on this one, right?
No, but if, let's say there is the penalty or punishment of like, if you do this, you could be put to death. You don't think that...
Oh, heck no, not at all.
You don't think that deters anybody?
I don't think anybody on the streets, right, committing crime today is watching the news and saying, oh shit, he just went to prison for life. That could be me next. Nobody's watching the 6 o'clock news thinking like, oh, that's a consequence for the crimes that I'm doing right now. That's like something that like law enforcement probably tells themselves, right? Or like prosecutors, like this is going to be a deterrent. It's not a deterrent for nobody because nobody in my neighborhood is watching the news.
Yeah, but what if you didn't think well, they got to know they're going to prison.
Yeah, but for some, prison is a badge of honor. They want to go to prison.
That's a problem, Jesse. That's a problem.
It's a cultural problem for sure.
How do we fix that? You are so smart and you're so well read. How do we fix it?
There is no one like cookie cutter solution, right? Like it has to be like a multi-pronged approach. Like there is no one solution, right? Like let's say you promote like at-risk youth programming and stuff like that, right? Well, just the concept that some youth are at risk versus others aren't, right? Why? And it's usually impoverished neighborhoods. It's usually Black and brown communities. It's usually like the neighborhoods where schools are jam-packed, 36-1, right? The ratio between students and teachers. So you're already at a deficit, You grow up in a deficit, you go to school in a deficit, right? You're basically like already, halfway there, right? You might succeed, but success to you looks different. Success to you looks like working at a fast food joint. Success to you looks like, running the streets and selling dope and stuff like that. It's not the same thing, right? It's not like the kids around this neighborhood. Surely out here, a curfew, right? He's an at-risk youth. At-risk youth is different in this neighborhood than it is,
Just so you know, I didn't grow up in this neighborhood.
No, I understand that, right?
I was a hooligan.
No, I understand. But when I drive down this street, right, I'm like, man, at-risk youth out here is different, right? Like somebody can go pick up that bike that's outside. This is the only neighborhood I've seen where they got a bike outside with no lock.
Don't be telling them that, Jesse. They'll come steal my kid's bike.
No, my thing is,
I know what
it's
you're saying.
like we have a lot of things that we tell ourselves, right? That we promote this idea of the illusion of safety, right? Like we have to tell ourselves that we're safe. If I get in my car right now, I have to drive to the Bay Area, right? I got 6.5 hours of driving, right? If I think about statistically, what are the chances of me getting into an accident with a big rig that I might die? Right? What are the chances? How many big rigs are on the 5, right? How many big rigs are on the 99 freeway? What are the chances of me falling asleep? What are the chances of if I start thinking statistically about everything that I read, right? I'd be paralyzed by fear and not get in my car. So I have to convince myself that, oh, people are safe drivers. I'm a safe driver. I can stay up. I got coffee. I got this. I got that. I got mitigators, right? And that's the thing, when we, like the ones of us that are involved in the criminal justice system, we have an illusion of safety that if we lock these people up, it's a deterrent for them. You stop me from doing crime, you don't stop the next generation. The thing that you do is you take away the role models that are supposed to be there, right? Like the second problem that we have in the neighborhoods, right, is we don't have any male role models. Everybody's in jail. All the uncles, all the dads, all the older brothers, they're all in jail. They're all in prisons.
How come the younger people in that household aren't thinking, geez, my dad's in prison, my uncle's in prison, my grandpa's in prison. Maybe I don't follow in his footsteps and do the same thing. Like, doesn't that thought process ever come in?
No, I think it's for what we talked about in the first episode, right? Like, you don't have critical thinking skills. No. So we want to project critical thinking skills. Public schools don't teach critical thinking skills. Public schools teach you rote information.
So don't you think maybe we should start there? Because we got to do something, right? Like, don't we have to do something to try to make a change and like bring light to this dark situation, because
Of course.
I don't want people to commit crimes, and I don't want victims to have to go through any of that. I would love to prevent it from happening in the first place.
Yeah.
And build that community that you're talking about,
Yeah.
that, you know, that the prison forced you into, with those authentic relationships.
Yeah. Well, I think so this is just a plug for my other work that I do, right? Like promoting the incarcerated run media content and things like that. So we have individuals who are in for mostly gang-related homicides out of Los Angeles, San Bernardino, San Diego, and a couple from Stockton and Sacramento. And all of these guys are like former Bloods, Crips, you know, Southerners, Northerners, and all of them are, you know, creating content that's building on like gang awareness, gun violence prevention, things like that. And it's not like scared straight program, right? It's just like, here are the raw facts of like what gun violence does to your community. Here are the ripple effects of what takes place, right? When you like violate somebody's sense of space, freedom, and liberty. Here's what can actually happen to you, you know, as a consequence of this. Like, it's just highlighting that for like junior high and high school students, things like that. So those are like our contributions. But I think at a grassroots level, there's another thing, right, that we actually can't address because we don't have the resources. So you have, like, for instance, let's just take the Department of Corrections or the carceral system as a whole in the United States. It's about a $90 billion a year industry, right? We're talking about $90 billion either being spent on medical, corrections, insurance, you know, different providers, you know, canteen and all that, $90 billion. You know, when we talk about like how much resources are invested into programming and things like that, we have less than 500 million.
Wow.
$500 million invested towards like rehabilitation, right? Reentry, you know, post-conviction support and things like that. But you have a $90 billion industry that is dependent upon somebody's failure.
So it all comes down to money, doesn't it?
It all comes down to what's the best investment, you know, to turn my bucks around. If I was just a capitalist, right? Like
that's what got you into prison in the first place.
No, I was an investor. I was an entrepreneur, right? I wasn't a capitalist by any means. I was an entrepreneur, right? Running a lot of dope game, right? As a 14 to 16-year-old, right? And I was not successful. You know, I did not become kingpin. I got a life sentence. But if I was a capitalist, right now, looking at where the election is going and stuff like that, right? I would tell everybody to invest in private prisons. Why? Because the writing is on the wall. If the Trump administration is already saying, hey, we're going to deport all of these people, before you deport somebody, right, there's a civil like mandate that they have to do. Like, you can't violate anybody's due process, regardless of what you think about their legal status in this country is.
Right.
You have to put them in the detention center and you have to take them to court. Guess where the boom is going to happen? In private prisons. The private prison industry is going to like blossom next year. They're already vying for these contracts. You're going to see like AmeriCorps, you're going to see like Geo Group, you're going to Core Civic, you're going to see all these private industries, right, that like make their money off of like the incarceration of human beings.
My husband day trades. Tom Brown, are you listening to this?
You should be listening, Tom. You know, give me a commission, though, because I put that out there.
Yeah, Jesse put that out there, right?
So the thing is, like, I'm not a capitalist, though. I don't believe that I want to make money or make my riches off of incarcerating human beings. Like, that's not the way to go. My investment would be deep investment into the communities, and it's a long investment that's going to take a while to like return some dividends to me. But we don't have that mindset. We don't have it. You know, we're promoting a lot of independence and stuff in this country, but we're not promoting any community authenticity. And I think that's the danger, right? Where we tell kids you can be anything you want to be, and we don't tell them, that's not necessarily true. It's within your limits. Because everybody has what they call the Peter Principle, right? Your level of intelligence is a certain, you know, like level. And you're going to rise to the level of your incompetence. That's what the Peter Principle is. So when you tell a kid, right, who's 16, 17, or 18, like, the sky's the limit, you're lying to him. You ain't telling him the truth. He has a limit to his intelligence. And you want to like say like, hey, any job that you take is great, as long as you have a value proposition, as long as you like do what you are passionate about and stuff like that, and you make a living legally. You know? Legally. That's the key operative term.
Wow. You have so many ideas. It's crazy. You read a lot, huh?
I do. I try to read, you know, a book a week if I can.
Wow. That's impressive. Is that what you did in prison? You just read a ton?
Yeah, I read about a book a day in prison.
Is that where you got educated?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I'm guessing at 17 and not in high school, you didn't have all these ideas.
No, No, I had ideas, not good ones though. Not good ones.
So there was some good that came out of you being incarcerated.
Yeah, there's a lot of good that came out of me being incarcerated. I think I would have nothing there. I don't think there's anything wrong with living a normal life. I don't think there's anything wrong with just having a family, having a 9 to 5 and just living a regular life. There's something decent in that. I went to prison at a young age. I found hope and purpose, and I found a passion that drives me. I get to get paid for what I love to do, but I would have done it for free anyway. Giving the incarcerated a voice, going into the communities and mentoring the youth, flying around the country, visiting institutions, and trying to give them a better perspective on how to do incarceration. You don't never want to promote incarceration, but there's a right way to do it to where you can do less incarceration if you do it right. So, getting to do that and spread that message, it's kind of cool, to do that.
And do you think that the end game is really, I think the goal is to make our world a better and safer place.
It is. I think it's about enriching people's lives. There's a book by Desmond Morris called Intimate Behavior. If you ever get a chance to read it, it's a really good read. But my takeaway from about 300 pages of it, is the fact that anything that enriches your existence is worth pursuing. Anything that diminishes your existence is worth getting rid of. And I think everything that we do, whether it's in our work, in our relationships, if it's not enriching our existence, then it's not worth doing.
Mm-hmm. But you mean in a positive way?
Yeah, of course. There's no such thing that doing bad is going to enrich your life in any way.
I agree. Amen to that. It's just teaching the young people that, right? Yeah. They think the quick buck, they think the fast sex, the quick buck, the fancy cars, the followers on Instagram or TikTok, that's going to give them some type of pleasure and feeling of purpose. And it just doesn't. That's just a lie that's been sold to them.
It gives them temporary pleasure, no doubt. That's the problem with it. It does give you quick pleasure, and that's the issue. But it's like a hollow pleasure. It's temporary. It doesn't last. It doesn't give you purpose, and it definitely doesn't give you identity.
Yeah, amen to that. All right. Well, is there anything else we can plug for you? This has been fascinating conversation.
Yeah, no. So I think Pollen Initiative is the organization that I
Pollen Initiative?
Pollen Initiative. Yeah. So it's basically the organization that we've developed, to promote incarcerated run media programs. We provide just multimedia training for the incarcerated to tell their stories authentically. The key elements that we promote is, you can't be an authentic storyteller without accountability, and you can't have accountability until you've done a lot of deep introspection. And that brings about change. I think the more stories that we tell and the more authentic we can be, the more society will be receptive to actually listening.
Amen. I love that. I do think that's really important, is telling your stories authentically and just let's just ask the hard questions or the deeper questions. Wow.
Yeah.
And we don't always have to agree on things, do we?
No.
Wow. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming all this way. I know you're here from the Bay Area just to come and tell your story and talk to me about all the great things that you're doing in the community. And I love that you're shining a light into the dark places for people and giving them a message of hope. I asked you to come down here and talk about your experience because I do know that you're out in the community and you're working tirelessly to give hope to people, even people that are, locked down in prison for life, and they do still have value and meaning and purpose. And I think you're a shining example of that.
Thank you.
That, you can still do good and turn things around, and that the 40-year-old man didn't think the same way as the 16-year-old. And I'm glad that the parole board chose to let you. No, I'm glad that I was there and I was able to get to know you better. And now I'm happy to call you my friend. And I love sharing ideas with you. And maybe you'll come back and answer some more questions and have some more conversations in the future. That'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Heather.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, well, that's a wrap. There it is, from the words of Jesse, from I don't even know what to say. From the words of Jesse, who was in prison and now he's out making change in the world, trying to make the world a better place. And to, enlighten us old draconian prosecutors who only think one way, and he's just shining a little light in my darkened thought process. And I love it. And I appreciate that. So thank you. So in the meantime, until the next episode, if you can't find the light, be the light, like Jesse. We'll see you next time. That's a wrap.
Be the light, shine so bright, turn